Welcome, folks, to Dicey Banter, a special program where we talk to all of the makers and shakers within the TTRPG space, sharing their wisdom, sharing their knowledge, and maybe expanding the realms of discussion further than we've anticipated before. And with that, before we get started, I and this channel stand against genocide and ethnic cleansing and support all the oppressed peoples all over the world struggling against injustice, imperialism, and colonization. Free DRC, free Sudan, and free Palestine. With that being said, hello everybody, I'm Valiant Dorian. I use he, him, his pronouns. You can find me all around the internet at Valiant Dorian or also SpiritBear. Please enjoy that lovely treasure hunt I just set you on. And tonight I am your host for Dicey Banter. And I have the distinct pleasure tonight of speaking to our amazing guest, Rowan. She is a co-founder of Rascal News, a journalist covering the intersection of progressive thought and niche cultural movements. Her work has appeared in Polygon, Tripsitter, Autostraddle, and the Fandomantles, where she's covered gender, psychedelics, and the largest developments in actual play, from award-winning indie programming to big-budget productions. Rowan, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Rowan. I don't know how I can do a better job introducing myself than what you just did, so thank you very kindly for that. I am a journalist who mainly covers actual play currently, but I've covered a lot of things in the past, which we're going to get into a little bit later in the conversation. But I have done a lot in a lot of different spaces, but right now I'm really dedicated towards the actual play artistic movement and really excited to see how it evolves.
And I'm so excited to pick your brain more about it. But before I can do that, let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that is Rascal. For the folks at home, Rascal is a new independent, reader-supported, worker-owned outlet for journalism about tabletop role-playing games and the people who make them. And we're here to chat about all things Rascal, the legacy of TTRPG journalism, and why does this matter? And if you're enjoying tonight's Dicey Banter, please consider donating and leaving us a tip. You can see a lovely logo that will be here above me. The funds raised will be used to tip myself as the tech producer, as well as our guests, to show our appreciation. Please use exclamation point in donate in chat to support us. And with that, I think it's time for us to start. There's no better way to start than to just start and chat.
I actually should have mentioned this before.
Yes.
Any tip that would be going towards me, I would like it to be redirected towards you or to be donated to an organization. We can talk about that more after the fact, but either if it helps you directly, I would prefer it go towards you.
Oh, bless. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. With that, no better way to start is by beginning. So let's talk about journalism. But before we talk about journalism, I like to know the origin stories of all the guests that come onto my show. So it is really important to me to ask, how'd you get into TTRPGs? Why this hobby?
A great question. My first experience ever with tabletop role-playing games was at a friend's birthday party. I think I might have been 16. A friend of mine was running a game of 3.5. I just happened to stumble into it, and I had no idea what was going on, but I was a theater kid and I was very obnoxious. And so I was like, this seems really up my alley. And then I played a game. I was a chaotic dwarf, as one does. I had a terrible Scottish accent, and the rest is history. Really, from there, I ended up watching or playing a lot of D&D in college. I got kicked out of college, actually, because I was allegedly engaging in marijuana, perhaps.
Allegedly.
I don't know. Allegedly. You can't pin anything on me.
No, of course not.
But yeah, so that kind of like threw my life off course a little bit. It was a really rough time, but I found a lot of solace in running TTRPG games for my friends. And so through that like communal storytelling that we did, I found a passion for storytelling that I hadn't, and I kind of lost through that. And then from there, I started watching Critical Role pretty early on.
Oh, gotcha.
It's like 2016, I think, is when I started watching Critical Role. So real early on.
Oh yeah, really early on. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the number of times that I've had folks who started as a theater kid, brought into their games, starting with D&D 3.5, I would have, if I had $1, I'd have $5. It's not, a 3.5 is a very common entry point into TTRPGs, is what I'm hearing consistently. And it's so interesting to hear about the fact that TTRPGs for you kind of came at this difficult and arduous time in your life, provide you a lot of support and comfort in those times. But what captured you about TTRPGs? What kind of made you stay in the hobby and start writing about it? Because this is your job now as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing that made me stay in it really was the sense of community. Was like every week, me and my friends got together and I ran a game for them, and it was really emotionally like it was. At that point, I was still identifying as cis man. Most of the people playing at my table were cis men, but we were all very like inclusive, very progressive individuals, and so getting to explore a lot of things in that capacity and just having that sense of community where like I was making a story for my friends and I could tell how deeply they appreciated it. And being socialized as cis men, people have a lot of difficulty having that intimacy.
Yeah.
And so TTRPGs really facilitated that intimacy between me and my friends that was difficult to access at any other point. And so just from there, I just kept playing, kept being like, oh, this is magic. Like, this is how I can have my community.
Absolutely.
And then from writing, that's a whole other arc.
An arc we will 100% get into. Don't you worry, folks at home. This is important for me to ask between one trans person to another. Did TTRPGs trans your gender?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, fantastic.
They played a really big part of it. I don't think I played a cis character in maybe a decade. It's been a while. But a really big part of it was I was actually the thing that like really trans my gender was I was in a college course. I was in a literature course. I had a trans professor. She was a professor for sure. She was not great. And I had this like light bulb moment where I was like, oh wait, anyone can be trans? And like that really got it for me.
Oh my god, I love that. And I do love when TTRPGs trans folks' gender. When I first started playing D&D, I actually started with a bunch of my trans friends, so we were all a bunch of trans folks playing an international game of D&D. During the height of the pandemic, I distinctly remember the exact week when it happened, because it was that week when we all got news from the CDC in the States of, oh yeah, it's not just 2 weeks anymore. We're not isolating for just 2 weeks anymore. It was that week where my friends went, oh, do you want to join our D&D group since you're not going to be doing anything else with your time? So my first D&D game,
please, absolutely.
First D&D game, a homebrew, all furry, almost all transgender table, and we played in a setting where you played furry characters. So it's like, okay, high political drama as well. It was great.
Of course, I love that so much.
I love that. It was great, but I do love the transing of gender within APs and all of that good stuff. And with that, I want to know. So you're a journalist, and you've mentioned that your specialism is in AP writing and things like that. And one of the main things we're interviewing you about today is about journalism. How'd you get into the career path to become a journalist?
Real roundabout, honestly.
Okay, I'm ready.
So my like public-facing persona on the internet actually started as a stand-up comedian. I was doing stand-up comedy for a while. I posted a clip that went pretty viral. It's a joke that is pretty well known in the trans community. It is, at the time, I was pansexual, polyamorous, and non-binary, which means I've never made a single decision in my entire life.
Oh my god! Oh, this is incredible, because that was the joke that several friends sent to me specifically. Oh, that's hilarious.
That was me.
That's hilarious because they would be like, "Is this you?" Like, and I'm like, "Why would you say that to me?" Targeted, and all these years later, it
Full
all goes
circle.
full circle. But yes, it started off with that viral moment.
And then from there, I was kind of going down the influencer route, and then I was looking for work, and this site that was doing comedy journalism hired me, and so I started writing about comedy. I covered my friend Lucas Arnold's show at the Edinburgh Fringe Fest, and so from there I was like, oh, I can like get paid to write about things that I care about, which was like kind of a revelatory thing for me because I had been working in book publishing prior to that, so I'd been doing stand-up and working as a book publisher, or a book editor rather. Yeah, I graduated into the pandemic, so gig work is the only thing I've ever known.
Nods to understanding.
So deeply real. And so I started doing that. I started writing for this site called Tripsitter, which I mentioned at the top. That is a psychedelics publication. So I was writing a lot about psychedelics. My first article for them was about psychedelics and gender and how psychedelics can influence gender identity. I wrote a bit about the history of gender identity. I wrote kind of globally about how gender identity has existed in cultures around the globe for the last like thousands of years. And then from there, I started going to some more personal writing. I wrote a piece for Autostraddle about being a trans comedian. I interviewed a bunch of trans comedians, and that was my first real experience like interviewing people for articles. And then I went down kind of a rabbit hole. There is a huge segment of my audience on TikTok who knows me because I was doing a deep dive investigation into reports of people's ADHD medication no longer being as effective as it was.
Oh, interesting. As someone who's on ADHD medication.
Yeah, and it lined up with a whole bunch of stuff. Like there was a patent exclusivity that had gone up, and there was a generic being made, and so it was Vyvanse specifically, a whole bunch of stuff going on there. I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole for a couple months and burnt out real bad because doing pharmaceutical investigation for a website that cannot really sustain or support that kind of investigative work was not great, was not ideal.
Yeah.
And then I was watching, because the entire time I had been still consuming actual play content pretty passively. I was still playing D&D on occasion, but it had kind of fallen to the wayside.
Yeah.
But then Dimension 20 was a big part of the content I was consuming. I had been sharing it with my partner, Max, who is also a stand-up comedian, and we had been watching it, and it was really lovely. And then Dungeons and Drag Queens happened.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, I can write about this. I've written for other publications about gender and intersections of weird niche communities. And so I pitched Polygon being like, hey, can I write about how Dungeons and Drag Queens is like really important for opening up the queer community to actual play? And that's kind of how I got started. That article was a huge hit. It is maybe one of the most successful articles I've ever written.
Oh my goodness.
And from there, I was like, oh, I don't have to like suffer for journalism. I can write about things that I enjoy. I don't have to go on these deep, scary investigations where like there's a black van parked outside my front door. I can I can focus on like the joyful parts of being alive.
Yes. Oh God, no, I can't imagine being in that position of like, again, a lot of journalism that folks on the outside looking in kind of associate are these big investigative, like huge scoops, the kind of deep analysis of the powers that be and unveiling many of the secrets that lie behind the curtain, right? That's what a lot of folks kind of associate with journalism. I think it flies a lot of over folks' heads how much work goes into that and how difficult that work is. So I think it's important for me to ask you, because it sounds like you've been on a huge journalistic journey. What keeps you going? What drives you down this path of journalism? especially since it feels like to me as an outsider looking in, a lot of the work can seem thankless.
Oh, it absolutely is thankless. That Vyvanse report that I was just talking about, me and my co-writer James, who wrote that piece, broke that story. The only people to talk about this were me and the New York Times. And it completely got lost in the internet because it was just gone. And it is so thankless, which is part of why I've shifted into the TTRPG community, because I feel like I can have a much more direct impact.
Okay.
I and the people at Rascal as well, we really view journalism as a service to the respective communities that it's a part of.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah, like it would be really easy for me to have decided when I wanted to pursue tabletop role-playing games to go down the actual play route, or to go down the game design route, or go down these other various routes where I could be more creative. And I still at some point might want to do that, but I know that my value to the communities that I care about is by doing this reporting. I can help a lot more people writing about actual play critically and doing these investigations into these various bad actors in the communities. I can uplift people. I can do all of these various different things that I would not be able to do as a creative, as a journalist. And so being able to ingratiate myself in the community and serve the community in this way is a big part of what keeps me going.
That like means a lot, especially within the community that is in the TTRPG space, where we're a niche within a niche within a niche, it feels like. Everybody kind of knows everybody a little bit. We are incredibly vast, but at the same time so small. The number of times I get into conversations with folks and find out that they know a friend of mine or a mutual of mine, or they said person has talked about you before, which is wild. And I just have to go, oh, I'm being discussed about out there in the world. Fantastic.
Don't perceive me.
I'm like, oh, I'm being perceived in rooms and conversations where I am not in. Wild position to be put in, which is so very cool and interesting. Hold on, the audio is being weird. And that's so deeply interesting. But I want to ask you about, you've been in so many different types of journalism, between comedy, investigating psychedelics, investigating like pharmaceutical aspects of like drug history and development and how it impacts communities. How is TTRPG journalism different from all those types of forms of journalism? And in fact, are different areas of journalism that distinct from one another even?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I think the similarities for good journalism across the board is a standard set of ethics, is the standard journalistic practices, are the ways you uphold yourself as a representative of communities and as a journalist, making sure that you are holding people accountable, making sure that you are minimizing harm to the people that you are reporting on. Those are the things that kind of stay the same when you're doing journalism well.
Gotcha. Okay.
The difference between larger journalism, like even comedy journalism to a degree, because it's still, it's also a niche community, but it's still a bigger community. Between like psychedelic journalism, each of these have their own niches. And like you said, each of these communities are so small and everyone kind of knows each other.
Gotcha.
The difference between all of those things and TTRPG journalism is one, there's no money in it. That no one is paying for TTRPG journalism, or at least they weren't before Rascal showed up. But there's a lot less money in it than there is in a lot of other kinds of journalism. I think that's true of culture journalism in general, because journalism is in a very dire state right now. But also there is a level of intimacy between the community. Like you were just saying, everyone knows each other, everyone has mutuals with each other. There is a balance between, like, I want to be everyone's friend. I'm like, oh my God, I love all the people in this community. I think that what people are doing is so incredible. I want to be able to just like celebrate everyone's wins and like cheer them on. But also the responsibility of being an ethical journalist is like having that distance, is having that wall a little bit to be like, I have to be able to look at this objectively, so that way if someone who is my friend does something bad in the community that needs to be reported on, I can't let my personal bias of, oh, well, they've treated me well. They've like, I don't know, we've gone to a bar and hung out at a community meetup, or I met them at a convention, or I read their book and I really think that what they're doing is incredible. Like all of that comes into play, but making sure that you are able to maintain that professional distance and report on things objectively is much harder in a community as tight-knit as the tabletop journalism or the tabletop role-playing game community.
And it must be quite a challenge to kind of weave between those lines as a TTRPG journalist, especially with how small our community is. How are you able to maintain that sort of like standard of objectivity? I know you mentioned like putting up a wall, but how does that look like in a journalistic sense within the space?
Yeah, I think a really big part of it, also this specific conversation, my co-founder Lynn Kodega had a conversation with Aftermath, which is another worker-owned independent journalism site, and they talked at length specifically about this. So if you want to hear more about this topic specifically, go listen to Lynn talk about it.
I will go and link it when this goes live.
Amazing, perfect. But yeah, the way that I really keep that balance is something that I have to really keep in mind in my own life, because I am a little bit of a people pleaser and I'm working on that, but making sure that I stay kind but not nice. Making sure that I treat everyone and never dehumanize anyone, that like everyone who's working on these things are working in the context of they are a person making art. But the important distinction that has to be made is the indie people who are doing this as a passion, as a hobby, as a second or third or fourth job, or not getting paid, or paying so they can do this and not making any money. And the people who are doing this as a corporation, the people who are doing this for profit. And the differentiation between a business and an individual is something that is always on the forefront of my mind.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that is honestly quite reassuring to hear ethical journalism look that way within this space. And I think this is a great time for me to ask you this important question of, what does an ethical, healthy, impactful journalism look like in TTRPGs? How do we know when it's working and journalism is functioning as is intended?
Yeah, I think some of the perfect examples of all of these things are Lynn Kodega's reporting last year on the OGL crisis, on the Wormwood scandal, on the Pinkerton scandal with Wizards of the Coast.
Yes. Yeah, that kind of happened back to back, didn't it? I just realized, wait, that all happened last year. Interesting.
And then Lynn got laid off, despite all of those things. So we're gonna circle back to that. We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that. No, I will definitely bring that up immediately after this. But yes, continue.
But yeah, that's how you know it's working. If stories are getting out there that bad actors or corporations are harming people, are going to be doing things that are going to be severely impacting people, and are doing it kind of under the rug, or doing it in ways that would not get attention. And then when journalism is funded enough so people can actually do the investigative work, and then is done ethically with this idea of like, who is this going to be harming? How are we going to make sure that we are holding accountable the people who are being accountable? How are we making sure that this isn't just catharsis, and we're not just writing to make ourselves feel good, and we're writing to like inform the community on things that are happening that are important and going to impact them? And making sure that that distinction is there.
Oh, I love that. That's a brilliant answer, and we did want to talk about it, so I'm gonna like circle back onto that. Like, the reason why Rascal exists and the reason why we're having these conversations is because journalism is in dire straits right now. But the folks at home might not be familiar with the difficulties that are mired within journalism right now. Would you like to talk a little bit more about the challenges that are facing journalism as an industry?
Absolutely. So journalism at large has existed for the last like 15, 20 years as an ad-funded model. Gotcha. It has existed mostly like that has how people have been paid for journalism, and a lot of people have been kind of conditioned to believe that journalism is a free resource that they should be able to get without paying. However, the difficulty of that is then if you're not paying for journalism, the money has to come from somewhere. And the money either comes from ads or sponsors or people who are going to have undue influence on your editorial coverage. Because they're giving you so much money, you don't want to risk losing the money because then you're not going to have a job anymore.
Yeah.
And then there's the other element of AI is becoming so popular that so many people are finding it cheaper to pump out AI articles that are filled with factual inaccuracies, that are not written by humans, that are not edited by humans. And so those positions are taking over the positions of journalists because journalism is a skill, research is a skill, fact-checking is a skill. And so making sure that the people are getting paid is happening because over the last 2 years, tens of thousands of journalism jobs have been eradicated, have been terminated. There are whole publications that have been shuttered. Polygon recently slashed their freelance budget in half because they just don't have the money. There's Dicebreaker is trying to find a buyer because they're running out of money. Like all of these things are happening because journalism is falling because late stage capitalism is a nightmare.
Yes. Oh, it all comes back to the great BBEG in all of our lives, and that is indeed capitalism. It is truly frightening, I think, to be a journalist in this space now, especially with AI coming into the mix as well, with like even just with the challenges that are being presented through late stage capitalism and the weird position that journalism is placed in currently as the internet has taken off and everything is online. Folks get their news online, and how we are able to kind of like make journalism profitable, sustainable, but also ensure that news is getting out in a healthy and also sustainable manner.
To catch you there, I think one thing is like journalism's not profitable. Journalism shouldn't be profitable. We should not be making money off of journalism. Our goal is just to like pay our rent and survive. We're not trying to make money. And I think that, it all goes back to Ted Turner, I think, with CNN in the 80s, making the for-profit 24-hour news cycle. It all goes back to that.
I haven't heard that name in so long.
But yeah, so that's where it all comes down to. It's like it's when people with money are trying to get more money and not realizing that journalism is a service and not a product.
Oh, it's so beautifully and wonderfully said. And I think this moment in time with Rascal should be kind of how I'm taking is a moment for us to kind of like change the narrative here and be able to do something new. But we'll talk more about that after I talk more about you and your journalism.
Not me. No, I was deflecting. No.
Of course, you and your gaming journalism, because I find the idea of journalism within the TTRPG space very, very interesting. And one of your areas of specialism is actual play journalism, AP journalism. What does that look like? What does that mean? Explain that to the folks at home.
So I'm figuring that out as I go along.
Amazing.
Because if anyone watching this probably knows, there are not too many people dedicated to covering actual play. Usually actual play is someone's passion project that they get to write an article about once every couple months. And usually it's just about Critical Role or Dimension 20.
That's also true.
And it's never about the indie shows unless you get someone like M. Friedman, who really, really is tuned in. Dr. Emily Friedman is a huge inspiration of mine. But yeah, I really think that this medium of actual play is only 15, 20 years old and in its current form as something that like people streaming, making content out of games, and watching a medium develop in real time from like a communal folk art of people telling stories around a table, very akin to like people telling stories around a campfire. And now diverging its way into like highly edited narrative shows and podcasts and TV shows and like almost feature film length kind of vibes. We're watching this maturation of a medium in real time, and I think that's the most fascinating thing. And the thing that's really important to me, like you were just saying, is we get to imagine what this looks like. We get to try something new, and we don't have to go the route of film. We don't have to go the route of the entertainment industry. We can imagine what it's like for people to tell their own stories without gatekeepers in a way that is sustainable and non-exploitative, and that's something that's really fascinating for me.
That is so deeply cool. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that, because you are watching this medium develop in real time. So at the same time, your journalism in the AB space is going to develop and change in real time. And I would love to pick your brain and know, like, what do you foresee, or what do you hope to see in the development of AB journalism? Paint me a word picture of the future of AP journalism and what it could look like.
So I have two main goals with my actual play journalism. The first one is discoverability, because I want, like, I was watching Beyond the Brook, a Over the Garden Wall inspired actual play that recently finished. I was watching that with my partner, and he was like, how does this only have 500 views? Like, how are we watching this thing that's so good that only has 500 views?
Yeah.
And he's right. Like, how does it only have 500 views? How is something that is so well crafted and tells such a great story with such high level performers kept in such a small container? And it's an issue of discoverability.
Yes.
With my reviews and my critique and my interviews on Rascal and my work prior to that on the Fundamentals, really hoping to centralize a place where more people can find actual plays, because there are so many. Like, it was like 2017 that Not Another D&D podcast came into existence. Like, that 7 years ago, people were already saying Not Another D&D podcast.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So, like, from that, and also don't quote me on the date, that might be wrong. Hey, everyone listening, get in the comments. I don't know if you want.
It's fine. You give us a correct date, but it's fine. It doesn't matter. It's okay. The general vibe of time is there.
Yeah, exactly. Time. Fake. Super fake.
After 2020, time does not matter. It truly stopped mattering.
So real. So real. But like, there's such a deluge of content, and so much of it is live streams. There are hours upon hours of content. Critical Role has hundreds of hours of content. And like, that's really intimidating for a lot of people. And so I want to create access points of like, oh, you like this kind of show, you can watch this actual play, or you like a comedy actual play, so you can watch this, or you like heavy drama, so go watch Transplanar. Like, these different kinds of aesthetics and entry points for people that otherwise would be like, why do I just want to sit down and watch six people sit around one microphone and play D&D? Not always well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That is. What were you saying? Continue.
Yeah. My the second thing that I want to do is with like my criticism is I put out a tweet very recently where I was like, hey everyone, I would love to start getting like real review and critique of actual play started, because that doesn't really exist at all. And critique is really, really important for any art form, not just like a new developing art form, but any art form needs to be able to, like, you put something out and you need to be able to speak to what that piece of art is within the context of all the other art that it's speaking to, within the culture that it's currently in, what it is critiquing and saying about that culture. And going back to your question about what makes TTRPG journalism difficult, is because so many people are doing this as a passion or doing this as a hobby, it's really, really hard to do completely unfiltered criticism like the way film critics go, because I'm not trying to make someone stop doing the art that they love. Like, that's not my goal in this. My goal is to talk about, like, what about this piece of art works? What about it doesn't? What is it doing in the tradition of actual play? What is it doing in the tradition of, I recently had a piece go out about Harlem Hellfighters Never Die, which is a black horror piece. Like, what is it saying about black horror and the genre of black horror? And that's what criticism in my mind is. And so I want to see a tradition of actual play criticism really start to blossom. And I don't want to be the only one doing it, because I have a very limited perspective. I am only one person, and I want more people to be thinking about this media critically, because actual play is art and deserves to be taken as seriously as any other medium.
I think that's beautifully said. And I know that conversation is currently happening in the space of the place of critique, and how there is a vacuum where that position should be filled in other cultural mediums that doesn't necessarily exist right now in the AP space. And even if it does exist in TTRPGs, it's pretty quiet. It's usually opinion pieces, op-eds, etc. of folks, or a tweet put out into the void of the universe of folks' perspective.
Blogs are very important to the
blogs
ecosystem.
Are also important. Yeah, there are also blogs that critique and chat about things. And you mentioned that towing the line between being able to provide that avenue within the space, but at the same time being careful when this is a passion project. What are the substantial steps that you are taking to take that kind of care, to use that high standard of care and duty towards the folks in the space while critiquing the art that exists here?
Yeah, so kind of going back to my answer before about like treating individuals differently from corporations. Like, I will critique, there's a critique up on the site for anyone who is a subscriber. You can see a critique of Faster Purple Worm, which is D&D Adventures official show, which is like an anthology show where every episode a new cast of first level players or first level characters face a legendary monster from the D&D mythos and inevitably die. And that is playing into like the tradition of improv. It's playing into a different kind of actual play. And I critique that differently than I also critique a different thing I have on the site, which is there is a Marvel TTRPG.
I did not know this.
There is a Marvel multiverse TTRPG that they did in collaboration with Glass Cannon Network, which has a historic problem of being anti-union, has a historic problem of being mostly white men on the program with like an occasional token individual. And the standards I'm going to hold a mega corporation posting an actual play of their product that is just marketing for their product onto their platform, like using the aesthetics of actual play as marketing. I'm going to talk about that differently than I talk about Harlem Hellfighters Never Die or Beyond the Brook.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it is important work, I think. It is, in my personal opinion, as a host of the show, I think critique is very, very important. One of my favorite things when engaging in a piece of media is listening to how that piece of media impacts other people, whether that's hearing how my friends enjoy things, which is a form, I would say, a form of critique and discussion and analyses, and going on to YouTube or other areas and hearing what folks think about my favorite shows, my favorite music, things like that. And it just makes me, even if I don't necessarily agree with what is being said or a person's perspective, it makes me analyze my own relationship with the medium and come out of it probably loving it more, or with a better appreciation of the medium. So that is a very, very important work that you're doing in this space. And now I'm going to ask you a pretty big question.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
I'm going to ask you a pretty big question. Why does TTRPG journalism matter? I know it's a pretty big one.
Why does anything matter?
That's true. I mean, yeah. It's true.
But like, yeah, why does anything matter? I can get real existential about this in terms of like...
Love to hear that, yeah.
The only things that matter are the things that we decide matter. I have been dealing with this a lot. You mentioned at the top of the show, there are so many crises going on in the world. There's an active genocide happening. There are multiple genocides happening across the world. And maybe my time could be better used elsewhere. Maybe I could be reporting on the climate crisis, or I could be reporting on politics. Or I recently spoke to Aaron Reed, an independent journalist whose entire beat is doing anti-trans legislation and covering that. And I could be doing all of those things. It would probably make me a lot sadder than covering tabletop role-playing game journalism does. But something that I've really come to learn through doing this work is that joy matters. Is like cultivating joy and focusing on joy really, really matters. And in this point in time in which we exist, making sure that that joy is, one, not exploited for profit, and making sure that that joy is radical, and making sure that that joy is coming from a place of building community rather than building hyper-individualism. But also making sure that I think the TTRPG space specifically has a capability that a lot of other culture niches don't, where TTRPGs are inherent in imagination. You need to be able to imagine the world you're playing in. You need to be able to imagine new structures. You need to be able to engage with this differently. I wrote a piece for Autostraddle where I spoke to a bunch of people. I spoke to Jay Dragon, I spoke to Connie Chung about the nature of radical gender exploration in TTRPGs. And TTRPGs have the ability to reinforce these ideas. You can play in classic D&D and you can be colonialist, you can be sexist, you can be genocidal, you can do all of these things. And the system is set up so that that's encouraged, actually. But what I really care about in the space is the people who are imagining new possibilities, who are creating new ways of being with each other, creating new ways and imagining new worlds of how things could be, and just like cathartically telling stories of people coming together to fight against these seemingly unbeatable oppressive forces that we're against. And so highlighting that and being like, hey, amongst all this suffering that we are witnessing and dealing with right now, we can still have this joy because that's the only thing that's going to get us through.
Absolutely. No, beautifully said. 100% agree with you with that. Joy matters, art matters, and hearing the confirmation. A lot of folks talk about online and throughout all these spaces about the idea of the transformative power of TTRPGs is what I will call it. The transformative power of TTRPGs, and it is magical because it is a form of media where we have to, like you said, imagine new possibilities and try and do new things within the space. And it's so heartening to hear that we can do that, and that folks are doing incredible work to make sure that dream happens, and that the journalists like yourself and the folks that are part of your collective are also participating in a new form of radical imagination, but within the TTRPG journalism space. And with that, I think that's the perfect opportunity for us to cut to break. Thank you all so much for being here. Please get up, stretch, pet your pets, tell them Mr. Valley and Dorian loves them very, very much. And we'll be back within the next 10 minutes. Please take care of yourselves, and we'll be back talking about more things Rascal news. Take care, everybody. And welcome back, folks, to Dicey Banter. I hope you took the time to get up, stretch, hydrate, tell your pets that Valley and Dorian loves them very, very much. And welcome back to a fun interview with one of the co-founders of Rascal News, Rowan over here. And before we get back into it, a reminder that we do have that lovely little Ko-Fi Go link that should be hovering right above me. And if y'all enjoy the content, please consider donating to us. Use !donate to tip us on our Ko-Fi jar, and we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Give Val money. Pay for the things you care about. If you consume content, support the creators who make the content.
Thank you. Yes, please support the creators that make you the fun content. We appreciate you. Amazing. With that, let's get back to talking about you and talking about Rascal. Let's talk about Rascal news. First off, congratulations on of launching Rascal. This is incredibly exciting, and I have to ask you, undertaking this huge new venture must have been daunting, tons of work right at the forefront. What inspired you to take that leap to make the Rascal News Collective?
Yeah, so journalism is dying, as we kind of addressed a little bit before. Like we mentioned a little bit before, Lynn Cadega reported all these huge stories, and then because of the powers that be at a large publication and the business executives cutting costs wherever they thought it wasn't profitable, they laid off Lynn Cadega. And I had been working at a different tabletop news outlet, and I had left due to some issues that I cannot speak on, unfortunately.
That's fine.
But Lynn, after being laid off, reached out to me and was like, hey, so what's going on? Like, are you interested? Like, I'm thinking of this new idea. Like, I got laid off. Journalism is kind of the only thing that I know how to do. I want to reach out to you. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I have some experience being a founder of something prior to this. I was a founder of Right Hive, which is a literary nonprofit. It is an organization where there is a yearly free convention that is hosted where people can take they can take panels, they can take workshops, they can go to presentations, they can find groups. And they host year-round events. I, unfortunately, because it was volunteer run, had to step away after about 2 years, but they're still very successful. They have an awards program going on. When I was there, we started a grant program that is still continuing where people gave money to indie authors for editing services or cover services. Right Hive, if you are a writer of any kind, is a really, really incredible resource. Highly recommend anyone watching this who has aspirations to write, go check out their services.
I'll have the command ready. Go and click that link right now.
So that's where my experience of like organizing this kind of stuff does. And so that happened around November. And then Lynn and I were talking, we were trying to figure out how to set this up. Lynn has done so much of the legwork here because this is really their baby, but because we have a non-hierarchical power structure, we all decide all of this by consensus, by vote, and have a really unified vision of what we want Rascal to be. From there, Lynn reached out to a bunch of other journalists. They unfortunately said no because they could not be guaranteed pay, which is so valid, so real. And me and Chase were the only two who were like, yeah, why not? Screw it. Because I had nothing else going for me.
So it sounds like to me that Rascal News kind of came out of adversity, out of necessity, especially within the space of all of it. And while constructing Rascal, it seemed that yourself, Chase, and Lynn had very, very strong ideas for what you wanted the aims of the collective to be. What are your aims for this collective? What are your dreams and aspirations for it?
Yeah, we really want to make a space where sustainable journalism can exist. We want to make a space where people who wouldn't get coverage anywhere else are getting coverage. The indie people who are doing all this incredible work who wouldn't be able to get coverage because they don't have the SEO drive of Dungeons & Dragons or Critical Role. And making sure that just despite the fact that SEO, which is actively dying again because of AI, Google is falling apart, that we're not depending on those methods to tell the stories that are important.
That means like that so many challenges right at the doorstep between SEOs, AI, the shrinking of the journalism industry. It feels like Rascal is trying to do something new, and I notice in a lot of Rascal's branding and the words that you've used to describe yourself, you describe yourselves as compelling, deeply reported, and fearlessly honest. What does that mean for the aims that you have for Rascal to be compelling, deeply reported, and fearlessly honest?
Well, compelling. We want it to be voicey. We want it to be fun to read. We want it to not just be kind of bland press releases that are rewritten up, because a lot of aggregated content for TTRPGs is press releases that people get from...
That is true, yeah.
And so then you just retype up the press release and it goes back up, and there's not much like opinion, there's not much commenting on what's going on. And so making sure that that's part of it, deeply reported. There is so much in the TTRPG space and kind of the internet at large, in journalism at large, that is reactionary, that is clickbait, that is really, really meant to prioritize sensationalism over fact, and making sure that anything that we're reporting on is done factually, is done with integrity, and is making sure that we're not just like trying to get the quickest story out there as soon as possible, but that we're telling the stories that are true and verifiable. And fearlessly honest, this is a little spicy.
I'm here for it. I'm seated. I have my tea. I'm ready.
So there's two folds of the Fearlessly Honest. There is the accessibility, there's access journalism, where so much of journalism in, especially a niche industry like this, kind of talking back to the difficulties of TTRPG journalism specifically, is that there are big brands that get all the attention, and if you say something bad about them, they can cut you off and you don't get access anymore. And that, there goes your revenue stream. There goes your whole vertical of talking about Wizards of the Coast or whatever. And so that's not what we're doing here. We don't need the access. We already have the access in a lot of other places. We are journalists trying to do our job. And so we're going to talk about the things that maybe make these companies look bad. And the other part of it, which is a little spicier and a little more contentious, is I think in the TTRPG industry, there is a problem that exists within all leftist spaces, where there is a real priority on pointing fingers and pointing out people as being bad people, so that way you are a good person for having pointed out the bad person, rather than creating a sense of community collectively and accountability. We exist on these ideas of restorative justice as leftists. Like, we all believe in abolition, we all believe in trying to make sure that we are moving forward together as a community. And a lot of people feel so disenfranchised by the systems that we exist under that they feel that the only control that they can have is by pointing out small bad practices from individuals who largely agree on things, who are largely on the same side, but because we can control ourselves within our communities, we can go, oh, we can ostracize this one person who we are perceiving as doing a bad thing, we can cut them out. And that is inherently antithetical to good journalism, because journalists are going to say things that people don't like, just by the nature of what journalism is. And so being fearlessly honest in this capacity is being like, hey, we're gonna say something that maybe is gonna make you feel something, is gonna make you have a strong reaction, but we're never gonna do it with the intent to harm. We're never going to do it with the intent to tear down an individual, unless they are specifically doing something really, really heinous, like exploitate, like there's some stuff that is outside of that, but we're talking within the realm of specifics here. That kind of fearlessness of being like, okay, we have to report on these things, and that might make us look like the bad guy, but we're still gonna have to do our jobs anyway, and we're all gonna have to be in community and figure out what that means together. And being in a community is a messy thing. Being of service to each other is a messy thing. And the sooner we can all kind of reconcile that and work together to move forward, rather than creating these artificial divisions of hypersensitivity because we don't have control of these larger systems, there's this one thing that's been in my head over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it is knowing where to direct your anger is praxis.
Okay. For the folks at home, what does that mean? Knowing where to direct your anger is praxis.
Yeah. It's a lot of theory words, so trying to break this down is the anger that you're feeling at the individual who has a perceived wrong against you. If you're directing your anger at them, you are tearing down an individual. If you are directing your anger at the thing you're actually angry at, if you are going, oh, this thing made me angry because it is representative of a larger system, and directing that anger towards larger system and working together with the people in your community at all directing your anger towards that system is how you make systems change. You're not going to make a system change by squibbling and quabbling between a community. You can hold yourselves accountable, but that's different from ostracization and reactionary fighting.
That is a very difficult line to toe, I imagine, because it feels like for journalists then, you are put in this position to report on difficult topics and to critique and inform and do your due diligence as journalism, but still kind of have to be in the line of all right, but doing right by communities all at the same time. And it is I imagine difficult work, and I admire you greatly for it. Incredible. Thank you so much for that lovely answer. I'm going to ask you a really fun question next.
But yeah, harsh pivot. Let's go.
Hard pivot for a very fun question. Don't worry, we'll get into some serious ones down the line. But just as a fun little tidbit, I've been curious about this as I was preparing my notes for today. But I have been very curious because 3 co-founders. How did the 3 of you come up with the name Rascal as the name of your news outlet?
Yeah, I can't remember where it came from specifically. I can't remember if Lynn had been called a rascal. On some podcast, Lynn had been called a rascal, I think.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah. And like, just like as a funny little throwaway thing, like, yes, Lynn Kodege is a rascal. And then as we were like throwing out ideas for the name of the publication, I kind of jokingly tossed out Rascal. And it just kind of stuck because like, yeah, we're little rascals. Like we're not, the work we do is very important for sure, but we're talking about games here. Like the implications of what we're talking about can be very serious, can have like huge consequences, but we're not going to take ourselves that seriously because that's how you kind of get lost in your own sauce. That's how you get pretentious. That's how you remove yourself from community, is by putting yourself like above community. But we're not. We're just little rascals.
Sorry, the drilling is getting a bit loud, so I'm just waiting
for it to die down.
Okay, it seems to be chill. Please, I'm begging on my knees. Anyways, we'll try and endure it as much as we can. Amazing. I love that name because I had a discussion with Lynn, a pre-production meeting. Keep your eyes peeled, folks in the audience. But when we were talking, we did talk a little bit about like the towing the line between being serious about the things that we talk about, but also understanding and having the perspective of we're talking about games here. And I would love to hear about your particular perspective on that experience of like, yes, we're doing really, really important work, but we are talking about TTRPG games, and this is supposed to be fun and not to take oneself so seriously. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, That's kind of why I center joy so often. I really because if we're not having joy in these things that we're doing, if these things are causing us so much stress, if they are causing us anxiety, why are we playing them? Like, we are playing games. The word play is so central. It's the verb that we are operating around. And play itself is a really radical act. Play itself, like everything in capitalism, everything in the world that we exist in, is optimized to take away from play, which inherently has no productive meaning. There is no purpose to play. There is no profit to be made from play itself. And so if we can focus on that, everything else kind of falls in line, because you can't separate any part of life from any other part. It's all connected. So, like we were talking about before, like TTRPGs transing people's gender. Like, that's a really ridiculous sentence and is so funny and fun, but there's something really radical about the act of being able to like fully embody a new person and get to experience the world from a lens of like in a safe container. And so you can have these two things at the same time. You can't let one outweigh the other.
No, that was a fantastic example to use of like transing one's gender, because it is an inherently radical act to trans one's gender, but to do it in a playful, almost whimsical way, in a way that's filled with joy, is both incredibly radical but also joyful and not meant to. It shouldn't have to feel that way. It should be a natural part of exploration and joy. And I think that was a brilliant example that you just pulled on there of what it means to toe that line. And we've talked a lot about the kind of disastrous state of journalism at this point, the disastrous state of SEO and the internet and a lot of these other aspects that are happening right now in our lives and our culture. And I wanted to ask you, when you were, all three of you were crafting Rascal, what did you all hope for Rascal to become? What's the big dream here for the future of Rascal?
The big dream for me is a sustainable place where journalists can come and develop their craft and write about things that they care about and get fairly and ethically compensated for it. That's like the real big long-term goal. I want discoverability for TTRPGs, for actual plays. I want more people to know about these mediums. I want the people who are doing the work in them already to get their recognition. But ultimately, yeah, I want journalists to be able to get fairly compensated, more than just the three of us, especially more than just the three of us. But that is so essential to me, because I don't think, again, we don't exist in isolation. We don't exist in a vacuum. The example of we can create something new, we can come together and create a new structure of what this could look like. We can create a crowd-funded model to go, hey, you guys care about the stuff that we're doing. Can you give us some money for it so we can survive and keep doing this? And shifting the dynamic, because the ripple effect of doing it in a TTRPG journalism outlet, like this idea of like worker-owned models started with like Defector and Hellgate. Like Defector talks about sports. Hellgate is New York politics. Like, these are way outside of the niche of tabletop role-playing games. But we used them and Aftermath for video games and 404 Media for just like tech in general as the foundation of what we were doing. And so you can see how the direct ripple happens across niches and across industries. And if that can happen in journalism, then it can happen in other things. Like, oh, like maybe there can be a TTRPG co-op, there can be an actual play collective, there can go, and then it can spread out. It can be in different industries, it can be in healthcare, it can be in education, it can be in these other places. We just have to imagine what these new structures are going to look like and then act upon those new ideas. And it's going to be messy, and it's not going to be perfect in the beginning, and it's going to have a difficult transitionary period between the old structures and the new. But I think I've referenced this actually in a couple of other interviews, but I don't know if you ever read the V for Vendetta graphic novel.
Oh, Rowan, I'm about to tell you some deep lore about Mr. Valiant Dorian over here.
Yes.
As a lovely Dicey Banter and Rowan exclusive. My name, the reason I chose my name was because of the monologue that V gives to Evie, where he goes on and mentions all these V adjectives to describe himself. And to name himself, and Valiant was one of them. That's why I chose the name Valiant. V for Vendetta, I watch every year on November 5th, and I make Eggie in a basket every time we watch it on the 5th of November.
That's amazing. So there's this real huge monologue in the graphic novel at the end where it's like, the world, there are destroyers. Like, the world has to end as it is. The things have to be destroyed, but there cannot only be destroyers. There also have to be creators. There also have to be people who can imagine and act upon what is to come next.
Yeah.
And I don't want to wait until everything's collapsed and around us to figure out what comes next. I want to start building that now.
Absolutely. No. That is so nice, because I really love V for Vendetta. It is a deeply, deeply important piece of cultural medium for me. So that
That's amazing.
And that monologue is also one of my favorite pieces of just text of just so deeply inspirational and honestly radicalizing in one's mind to radically believe and build the new systems that we dream of. And I can't imagine that your process of radicalizing and building Rascal from scratch to make this kind of brand new imaginative medium exist. I wanted to ask you, what have been the greatest challenges so far in building Rascal?
Having no money has been a big challenge, to be for real. Having very little playbooks. The other models that have been doing this have been around for less than a year for the most part. So this is all very, very new for everyone who's trying to do it. So not having real playbooks, there are a couple, but nothing real solid and long term. Which has been really fortunate, a big part of why we have such a small team is one, because it takes a lot to pay people. We got really huge support. We're still nowhere near sustainability long term for the amount of money that we've received. Decision making is also a really difficult process with a lot of people. I have done in my own personal life a lot of protesting work, a lot of advocacy work, and the consensus votes that need to occur within radical spaces are very long and difficult processes. And to make sure that everyone is genuinely actually happy with the outcomes of those things takes a lot of talking, and takes a lot of patience, and takes a lot of emotional maturity and regulation to be able to engage in these really difficult conversations. And so having to work with each of all three of us are neurodivergent, so working with each of our different work styles and communicating honestly and working through the shame of, I'm having burnout right now, and so I haven't worked in a couple days and I feel really bad about that, or I'm having a personal emergency and I'm having so many things going on in my life right now that I still need to get this work done, but I'm being misdirected because life happens. And so facilitating a space where that is not just understood, but is welcomed and embraced and supported actively is a very difficult process, but such a rewarding one.
No, I that is deeply incredible. And once again, congratulations on building Rascal and the I cannot imagine the amount of work that has gone in to build something like this, especially when you mentioned a worker-owned model. I did some research on what that
Mm,
looked like, and it is such a new concept. It shouldn't be, but in terms of like looking at those who've come before us to see where the paths they have tread, avoiding pitfalls that they must have had to deal with, is harder to do in your stead, because you are right with a lot of these other groups trying to bring this model to life and reimagine a new way that we can sustain ourselves in late stage capitalism and in this capitalistic hellscape that we are all finding ourselves in. Um,
yeah.
but in the interest of talking about sustainability, about the greater aims
Mm,
that you have as Rascal as a collective, and all these dreams and goals that you have, I think it's important for us to also recognize the current staff for Rascal is
mm,
currently all white.
yes.
The three of you are the co-founders, and the three of the co-founders are indeed all white. And I wanted to ask you about, kind of posing to you a hard and difficult question here of what plans do you have currently to expand the team or include BIPOC writers into the fold of Rascal News?
Yeah. It's not a hard and difficult question, honestly, because it's
Okay.
something we care about a lot and something we thought about a lot. And I think if it is a hard and difficult question for some people, maybe they should think about that and think about why it's a hard and difficult question. But like we said before, Lynn reached out to a lot of writers, and that included a lot of writers of color. And inherently, getting into journalism in general is a really privileged position to be in that requires a lot of funds because it's a very unsustainable career unless you have a very easy access point. And so there are a lot of people who are not as privileged who simply couldn't afford to be like, I can't work on something for 3 months with no guarantee that I'll ever get paid for it. And that's so real and so valid. And that was something that Lynn and I were talking about from day one, being like, hey, we cannot do this because we're going to have such a limited perspective if it's just a white writer's room. The way things turned out, that's kind of what happened, which is unfortunate, but it's something we're really trying to address pretty immediately. We are going to, before we can bring on a full staff writer, because the first full-time staff writer outside of the three of us that we want to bring in is going to be a person of color, whoever that person is going to be. We don't want to add a fourth white person to the team. But until that point of sustainability, whenever that happens, if that happens, fingers crossed, is we're going to be working with companies and individuals to sponsor contributorship programs and freelance programs that are going to be helping develop BIPOC writers to facilitate journalism. Because as TTRPGs go and as journalism goes, it's a very white dominated industry just across the board. Because there aren't these incubators where people can kind of cut their teeth, to use a metaphor, can't really learn and develop the skills that it takes to be a journalist in the public eye, unfunded. And so making sure that we're building that incubator is a huge first priority of ours. Any expendable income that we get outside of us being able to survive and pay our own rent and groceries is going to be going towards contributorships and fellowships that are going to be primarily towards Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people not from the global North.
With that, you kind of already answered a little bit of like what the next question I was going to ask about, what the substantial steps were going to be taken to ensure it doesn't fall by the wayside. And it seems that the three of you have constructed and thought quite deeply about the status of the current writers' room and the ways that you can include BIPOC writers. I am looking forward to it. I can't wait to see new talent being grown and sustained and developed through these fellowships and the model that Rascal is working with. And on the topic of TTRPGs being very white, but
Mm-hmm.
also incredibly Western specific, I wanted to ask about like
Mm-hmm.
Rascal and its content, and what steps folks that you might have been taking or thinking or taking about decentering the white perspective as well as the Western perspective within the journalism and the content that you are providing to folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially as three like radical white queers, we're very aware of where our intersectionality falls into everything.
Mm-hmm.
We understand that like our queerness does not excuse us from all of these other aspects, and really despite being marginalized ourselves, we still have this understanding of how it all plays into everything. So we're making sure that the coverage that we have and the people that we're covering are not just from our own perspective. Like, so many of the people that we are talking to are Black, Indigenous people of color, are people from non-Western countries. My first big pieces that I did, like, yeah, I had the pieces with Zoe Zephyr and Erin Reed, who are two white trans women, but then the piece I had immediately after that was about the Harlem Hellfighters show, about the Harlem Renaissance and the experience of being Black in the TTRPG space, because there are not platforms for individuals to talk about that experience in a like facilitated, credible way, which has its own problematic elements to it, right? Like these, you only get validity if you are given this platform by an institution, which is inherently problematic. But right now I'm working on a piece where I spoke to an Argentinian tabletop journalist about a report that he did last year that was written in Spanish, so it didn't really break into the larger Western ecosystem, but it's a really intense piece about like a Latin American ambassadorship program and the ways that that negotiated with Wizards of the Coast and some problems that were happening there. And so really attempting to connect these communities, like immediately, this was a really fun example of this specifically, is Federico, the Argentinian journalist, was talking about how press kits are really important for getting projects out to journalists, and talking about like, hey, how do we make it so that way like people in the global south, people who don't speak English, can have these resources to make press kits. And so now with my position at Rascal and my own notoriety in my platform, I got to retweet him and be like, hey, can anyone help out Federico? Can anyone like come together and build these bridges in this community? And then immediately there were people who were like, oh yeah, I have these resources. How can we figure out how to translate them into Spanish? How can we make sure that people are able to access these resources so that way they can get viewed outside of the like arbitrary national boundaries that our world has set up? And so building those international communities is a huge part of what I'm trying to do. We want to make sure, oh, that is my phone alarm. We want to make sure that we're just like, we are a big community. We all love games. And there is something really interesting that Federico was talking about the Argentinian community, that the tabletop community down there is a very largely progressive community. And so we share these ideals. Despite not speaking the same language, we have the tools to translate for us. We have these things that can break down these barriers and connect us. So why not use them? Like, why not make sure that we have this international global community become an actual community?
No, that means a lot to me as someone who is based in Malaysia, as folks will know. And I've kind of seen, I'm privileged enough to be able to see the both sides of this of this position of being I've lived in the States, I've lived in the UK, I started my TTRPG work while I was living in the UK, and being able to kind of like see the privilege of being able to be in the Western side and then living in the global south and living in Malaysia and seeing all the threads that make things inaccessible for folks who are here. And it does mean a lot to be able to feature these creators. And I do want to latch onto that idea of building international community, because I think that's the thing that's next for TTRPGs, is to actually bridge these international communities and not feel like we have what it feels like distinct groups and areas, except for a handful of creators that have managed to break into the Western sphere almost, but being able to kind of like coexist together and naturally in that sense. Which is
I was on Twitter and I saw people in Portuguese having discourse, and it was the same discourse that people are having in English, and I was like, yes, we really are a community. We're having the same conversations in different languages.
Not the international universal discourse. True. That is both like, oh wow, we are so similar. What a thing, like an experience that binds us all together. But also, oh gosh, all of us. Does this mean we're having the same 5 conversations, like times every single language, multiple times a year as well? Because that sounds so cursed, and I wish for
that's
us
where it goes
back
back to knowing where to direct your anger is praxis.
Knowing where to direct your anger is praxis, and knowing, wow, the universality of suffering.
Life is suffering. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's incredible initiatives, and I did see that tweet that you had for Federico about making press kits, and I felt my heart getting really warm, and how incredible the response was to folks coming in and helping out. It feels kind of sad that it took the year of our Lord 2024 for us to be able to like kickstart a lot of these initiatives and securing visibility and discoverability for folks in the global south. But it is greatly appreciated. And thank you for answering that question. It is a problem that's existed for a long time, and I'm glad that Rascal is taking the courage to tackle it and try to contribute to the community in that way.
And also, we're not going to be perfect, and that's something we're very aware of, and we're so eager and excited to be called in.
Yeah.
We don't want to be called out, because again, knowing where to direct your anger is praxis, and we are all in community together. And so if you have a problem with us, talk to us about it, and we want to fix it. We want to make sure that we are representing our community. We want to make sure that we are doing right by our community, and we can't do that if we're all just yelling at each other all the time. We want to do right by everyone, and we're not going to, because we're human.
This actually is a perfect segue to a thing I did want to touch on earlier, but now feels like the perfect time to pull it in. We talk about like struggling with imperfection, and you have mentioned that you are also a people pleaser, and the kind of like not to call our group insular, but our small group that exists here in the TTRPG space. And I wanted to ask you about balancing that, about leaning in, like not necessarily leaning in, but like balancing the idea of not being perfect all the time while managing all these expectations and duties and obligations to the community. But now it's not just yourself as a journalist, but to your collective of Rascal. How are you managing all of that now that Rascal's live and now you're able to kind of like see the work in real time?
I am deeply anxious a lot of the time. If we're gonna be so real. I am really anxious anytime an important article goes out. Anytime, like with the Harlem Hellfighters articles went out, I put so much love and care into making sure that what was said during that conversation was represented authentically and was represented as it was meant to be told. but I understand that sometimes I might fuck up and I might not do that well. And so I'm going to hit that publish button and I'm just going to wait to see if people on the internet yell at me. But yeah, I think that ease will come the more people trust us, and we have to earn that trust first. I think a lot of the work that we've done prior to this has proven that we are people who are trustworthy and care about this space and this community. But there's still times that we have fucked up in the past as individuals, and there are still times that people are angry about things that have happened in the past, and that trust has to be earned back. And that's so fair, and we're going to do that work to earn that trust. And having confidence that I know that I care about this community and I care about the people in it and I am doing my best is all I can do.
No, I love that. And, you know, having the ability to have confidence in our independent, free press that is ethical and sustainable is incredibly important, and something that we, not only as a TTRPG community, but us as people in society all over the world, should strive for and to, endeavor to create within our communities and societies that we exist in. So it's important work that you're going through. I cannot imagine the stress, but I think, Rascal, you're doing a lot of good work. And speaking about all the incredible work that you are all doing, as we begin to wrap things up, I want to ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
First thing I want to ask you is, what can folks expect and look forward to in Rascal's near future? What other things folks at home can get excited about?
We got a lot of really cool articles coming out. Like I said, I got that Federico report coming out. Mm-hmm. I got a really interesting conversation with Carlos Luna from Dimension 20 coming out about his philosophy behind actual play in general. Mm-hmm. Looking on my board right now, I have a really wonderful...
I sit like right in front of you.
Whiteboard set. Yeah. I have a really cool interview with Dylan from One Shot about their work and what he does in the TTRPG community in general, but also about activism and how TTRPGs play into activism. We're going to be doing labor reporting, talking about the way that unions engage with the TTRPG space. We talk about so many cool things. Really, anything and everything that the community cares about is what we're going to do. And if you have a cool story, if you have a tip for something that you want to get to us, tips@rascal.news, info@rascal.news, press@rascal.news, send all of those things to us. Something you can look forward to literally right now is our free to access community announcements board, where anyone can submit us a press release and we will moderate them to make sure that nothing heinous gets on the board. But a centralized place where you don't have to pay to see all of the things that are going on in the TTRPG community, from actual plays to game games, to job postings, to casting calls, to like award announcements. Having a centralized place where everyone can see what's going on rather than it just like getting lost in your Twitter feed immediately was really, really important to us, and is something that we're going to continue doing and continue to develop in the near future.
That is so cool, because as someone who has to continuously promote his work on twitter.com, I suffer every time I have to do it. So thank you for making that incredible community board. I think that's so important. And finally, before we wrap things up, I have an important question for you, Ro. I wanted to ask you, what impact do you want to have and leave as a journalist here in the TTRPG space, community, and industry?
A lot. There are a lot of things I want to leave and impacts I want to have on the community. I want to create a more cohesive community. I want to create a more collaborative community where people operate from a place of care for each other rather than reactivity. I want to create a space where people's work can be recognized, even if it is not paying them, because pay does not equal value in art. It does keep the lights on and keep you fed, which is really, really important. But we're at a place in our industry where that is not feasible for a lot of people. And just because the money isn't there doesn't mean the art that is being created is any less valuable. What I want to leave for journalism in the space is I want to create a pathway for people to become journalists in the space. I, as we talked about in the beginning, got here really by happenstance. I literally, in the middle of this interview during the break, my partner was like, yeah, the way that your career has gone is you have kind of spun around and thrown a dart at whatever it is you are interested in doing. And that's correct. That's exactly what happened. And I think everyone should be able to do that. I think that everyone should have the capability of pursuing the things that bring them joy. And if we can create with Rascal a incubator and a space where people can get paid to learn how to be a journalist, an ethical journalist in this space, and an ethical journalist at large, I would love to leave that lasting impact. And more than anything else, I just really, really want the TTRPG community to become a real community. I want the reporting that I do and the things that I write about and the ideas that I bring forward in the articles that I write to maybe change some hearts and minds, sure, but make people realize that we are all together and we are all fighting against these large oppressive systems that want to take away all the joy, want to alienate us from each other and force us to not think about the things that bring us joy, not make art. And I want us to all come together and realize that the world doesn't have to be like this, that we can choose to do something different.
I think those are all very, very well said, and I am so excited to have you and Rascal in the space to do that important work for us, and I'm very, very excited for everything that's coming up next for you. Congratulations again for the launch of Rascal, and thank you so much for being here on Dicey Banter. Please introduce yourself to all the incredible folks. Tell them who you are, where they can find you, how they can support you and Rascal here on out.
Yeah, you can find me all over the internet at Rowan Zioli. You can find Rascal on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok at Rascal_news. You can find us on Blue Sky at rascalnews.bluesky.social. I don't know if you're on there. And you can find Lynn at Lynn Codega. You can find Chase at Chase Writes or at Chase Carter on Blue Sky. And you can sign up for Rascal. You can become a subscribing member if you don't have any money. That's completely okay. We have some free articles that come out. If you do have money, please pay us so we can keep doing this and then get more journalists in the game. That is rascal.news, and real straightforward, real to the point, and we would love to have you.
And all those links will be available. And thank you so much again for being a guest on Dicey Banter. It's been such a pleasure interviewing you and chatting with you about all things Rascal and about your journalism and the work that you do within this space. I'm going to introduce myself really quick. Hello, everybody. I'm Valiant Dorian. I use he, him, his pronouns. You can find me all around the internet at Valiant Dorian or at Otso SpiritBear. Please enjoy that lovely treasure I just set you on. And tonight, I was your host for Dicey Banter. If you want to keep an eye on things that I am on, every Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, Transmedia RPG is live with the Chaos Protocol, where I play Sayer, the misbeloved twin brother of the Chosen One. I'm sure there are a ton of other projects I'm part of when this goes live. And keep an eye out for The Beast Within, my first ever TTRPG, a narrative-first action RPG reminiscent of 80s and 90s grunge fighting games where you play werewolves. And if you're into that, our playtest is starting soon, and we will be having our quick start guide out as soon as possible. Please keep up to date with the link that I'm sharing right now. And with that, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for supporting Dicey Banter. I just remembered, I should also announce the launch of our Patreon. Dicey Banter and myself finally have a Patreon. If you'd like to support our content, including the notes that I make while producing all the content that I produce, the free access to the episodes just before they come out, and all that good stuff, please go and subscribe to my Patreon. Your monetary support is greatly appreciated, and your support here is also greatly appreciated. And with that, thank you once again, Rowan, for being here. You've been a lovely guest. I adored interviewing you. And with that, we're going to raid somebody amazing, no doubt. Please hold the dial until we raid in and show them some Spirit Bear love. And I will see you on the next stream. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.